Today we are talking about my top 5 favorite things that I'm looking forward to in Fallout 76. Now, not all of these are necessarily just features in themselves, but rather just aspects of the game, of the design, of the concept that I like a lot, but also some features. That is not to say that I have no doubts about the game at all and that I don't have any critical points or things that I'm worried about with how the game is currently set out, but those are for another video where I'll talk about the exact opposite. Today, we'll talk about the positive aspects. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Spot number 5 goes to the monetization system from what we know so far. A lot of games are very frustrating when it comes to their monetization, and you have to invest a lot into them, and it can just be straight annoying, especially when you already paid a full price for the game. From what we know about Fallout 76 so far, atoms, the currency that is used to buy any kind of cosmetics, and that's the only way to really spend money as well, are very easy to come by. You can buy them if you want to, but you also get a lot of them early game from questing, and later you will be able to get more of them from different daily quests or different daily events, and as such, you will always be kind of having a constant flow of them. I like this because this way it will neither drain your time nor your wallet, and that I think is pretty good design. I hope this plan doesn't change later down the road, but if Fallout Shelter is any indication, they have a similar system there and it works quite well for them. They seem to make enough profits even though you can easily play the game without spending money, so let's hope that this is true for Fallout 76 in the same way. Point number 4 are mutations, and by extension also locking in mutations. In case you're not aware of the mutations yet, if you get too much radiation through enemies or through other means, for example through drinking dirty water, then you can get random mutations. These mutations are not necessarily all bad. They can have positive benefits for you, like damaging enemies when they attack you, for example. So you might want to keep some of them sometimes, and there are perks to do so. I don't know if there will be more than perks in the future, if there will be other ways. I imagine that just one perk might not be sufficient with them being random and you might not be lucky enough to get it early on. But either way, you will have those mutations, and they sound like a very fun addition to the game that adds some unique gameplay elements that you can also kind of maybe build your character around. Point number 3 is the general concept of it being multiplayer. Now, I know a lot of people would have preferred a single player game, but what I like about the fact that it's multiplayer is that it's more like a co-op multiplayer in many ways. And honestly, who doesn't want to play their favorite single player games with their friends? Okay, I guess some people don't, but really, I was somebody, for example, with Skyrim as well, who always wanted to play Skyrim with others, and I always wanted to play Skyrim together, which is unfortunately still not released at this point. But it just isn't possible in most games, and games are typically not designed for co-op, and I loved Borderlands for having this feature. So having this feature included in Fallout 76 is something that I very much look forward to, because I enjoy playing with my friends and it makes things a lot more fun. And at the same time, in the same context of this very point, I also really like the PvP and PvE concept. You aren't forced to engage in PvP at all, and you can completely ignore other players if you would like to. You can even shadow ban them if you want to, if you don't want any interaction, don't want to see them at all. And as such, the feeling of being in a world where you are mainly in control can be yours if you want to, but at the same time you have the option to switch to the PvP radio, join Hunter and Hunted, and that way get a target that you have to hunt and somebody else is hunting you, and all of you have PvP enabled among each other. Being able to switch between casually exploring the landscape and questing, and then going into hard PvP where you know that somebody's after you and you are in a situation where you can constantly fight, is very cool to me. There will probably be some things with the system that will have to be ironed out, but with Bethesda saying that they will have a very aggressive patch cycle, that shouldn't be an issue for long. Then point number 2 for me is base building. I don't know why and what it is about base building, but honestly, I love the concept. I've not been a fan of base building in every single game I've been to, but in some games I really love it. One, for example, is Don't Starve, or Don't Starve Together rather. And it's very much a similar concept. Now obviously there are many games with survival aspects and all that kind of stuff, and base building is a part of that, but overall it just reminds me a lot of Don't Starve Together in how you have multiple players that you build your base kind of together with, but you can also kind of build it separate, and you have a lot of things that you produce in your base, and you also have just random decoration stuff that you can put there because you want to. I mean, in the end, Fallout actually expands on that a lot by adding a lot more fun features like instruments, like basketball hoops, and all kinds of other stuff that you can play with. But I just like this, and I think that base building also has a great potential to make for a very good late game, because I imagine there might be some more rare materials that you can collect that you have to farm in order to build the coolest things in your base and really show those off. And if that's the case, I will most certainly have a lot of fun with that, because having the kind of base race with your friends, a kind of base battle, is something that also creates a little bit of a fun challenge between friends. And that brings us to point number 1, though all of these are kind of not really in a particular order. And that is actually one of the most simple points from a standpoint of what games offer nowadays. But I really like that this takes more of a focal point in Fallout now. And that's the character development throughout the game, in how you can very much customize your character's playstyle through the special system. This will have a bigger impact, as some things start out at a very low base value, like for example your VAT system just being very, very basic unless you invest into it, and people apparently being able to have very, very different specializations and having very different gameplay feelings depending on what kind of character they're playing. I always love it when you can specialize in games, and especially with the VAT system in Fallout, you always had this kind of standard path from which you could obviously deviate, but there was a core mechanic where the game kind of revolved around it in many ways. Now, with the VAT system being more in the background, each character can have a very different playstyle. You may have someone who's specialized in VATs and uses sniper weapons that way. You may have somebody else who just snipes a lot but uses a normal weapon for that and doesn't use VATs and has other amplifications for that. And then you may have someone who goes for melee, and you have someone who goes for VATs melee. So really, there's a lot of flexibility, and that's by far not just limited to combat, but also resource gathering, etc. Which means that in a team, every player can have a very unique role. And honestly, especially after having so many games lately with either minimal character differences or just battle royales where every character starts out the same, it's very nice to have actual distinction between each player's character and just their isolated development for themselves, where they can decide which path to go down. And I guess the entire world in itself is an extension of that as well, as you can be a pure PvPer, you can be a PvE player, you can be a solo player, you can be a team player, or all kinds of in-between aspects. I imagine there will be people just focusing on base building, others just focusing on hunting and all that kind of stuff. And if that all pans out the way that it's planned, I think it's going to be a very lively world, while actually not being very lively at the same time, if that makes sense, from how the game's designed. And I think that's cool. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope it turns out that way. I don't want to jinx it, and I will keep my doubts and worries for sure, especially after having quite a few disappointments with newer games lately. But so far I'm optimistic, and that's it for this video. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. I will continue to make Fallout 76 content as well as my content, so feel free to check that out. And other than that, see you for the next one later. DukeSloth out.